Hi, I'm Devoki, and this is Okie Dokie Boki, and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read last year in 2025 that I still find myself talking about this year in 2026. That is how years go. That is how time progresses. Basically, a recurring theme in my reading for the past few years has been that I just have had a hard time with it. I have found a lot of my familiar, authors, genres, whatever, the things that I usually would turn to had just not been hitting. And it's been really frustrating. It's been a really big bummer because I really love reading, but it happens. And because of that, I haven't read that many books, and I've also tried to pick up a lot of books and then just put them down. And usually I think of DNFs as this big thing that I consciously decide to do, because sometimes it is. Sometimes I have to make myself stop reading a book that is actively irritating me and just be it is okay to not finish, right? So I think of DNFs as a thing that I actually am just deciding to do. But a lot of the books I've read in the past few years have been DNFs in the way where I just put them down one day and I never pick them up again. They just don't get finished. It's not that I'm thinking I don't want to read this book. It's more I'm put it down thinking I'm going to get back to it, and then I just completely lack the inertia to ever pick up the book again and get back into what I'm reading. The thing about it that's been interesting to me to kind of look back on is it means that for the most part, if I finished a book last year, I loved it. I haven't read many books that I didn't like in the past few years, because most of the times if I didn't like a book, I didn't finish it, right? I just put it down and I just didn't finish it. So most of the times if I finished a book, I loved it. That is why I finished it. I was really actively enjoying it. So that is kind of the bright side sometimes of when you're in these weird moods where it's you're super picky and it's really annoying because nothing's working, but if you find the thing you like, you really, really like it. And that's kind of how I feel about these books. They're books that I read last year, and they just keep coming up when I talk to people about books, or really a few other topics as well, which we'll get into. They're books that I can't stop telling people about, which is why I figured, hey, I should talk about them here on this channel where I talk about books again, finally, after all these years. So the first book is A Physical Education by Casey Johnston. Casey Johnston is a science writer, and this is her memoir, I guess mostly memoir, of her getting into weightlifting, or lifting heavy weights. I shouldn't say weightlifting, lifting heavy weights. So I think predominantly powerlifting, and examining her own personal journey through that through a broader kind of cultural and scientific lens. So a lot of that is about how her getting physically stronger also translated into her relationships with her body, her partners, her family, and really her own story. And I read this book because basically it was designed for me. When I was doing my PhD, I got really into lifting. I really got into powerlifting, and then for a period of time did CrossFit, and I loved lifting. I loved being stronger. I loved the workouts. All of it was just so fun for me. And I kept lifting even after I graduated for a little bit, but I reached a point where I was getting really burnt out on it. I just wasn't having as much fun with it. And then especially once I started going through this pregnancy journey, which was pretty difficult at times for me, I needed to make a switch. So for a few years, basically, I stopped doing heavy lifting, and I was doing more kind of body weight focused exercises like bar and Pilates and yoga, and then also a lot of running. So I really did that for a good period of time, and I'm glad. It was completely what I needed at that time. It was a really different way of using and moving my body, and bar in particular, I did it while I was pregnant this last pregnancy, and it was a huge lifesaver. Everyone's experience during pregnancy and with exercise is different, but for me, if I went a week or two without going to bar, I felt it. My hips hurt so badly. So bar was a huge lifesaver for me when I was pregnant. So I'm really, really glad I did that. At the same time, about a year postpartum, I kind of went through this phase of feeling that exercise, modality or whatever, just wasn't really hitting it for me anymore. I kind of wanted something a little bit more intense, something that would involve a little bit more strength. So I decided to get back into lifting. And so around that time, I think I had found Casey Johnston's newsletter, She's a Beast, which is a newsletter that comes out twice a week most of the time. And there's like a free version where you get like links about, you know, various weightlifting topics and everything. And then she also has like a more detailed explanation of different sciencey or cultural aspects of lifting behind her like paid version. And it's a great newsletter. I highly recommend it. I initially subscribed because I was using it to kind of like parse out what resources I wanted to use as I was getting into lifting. And then I just like fell in love with the newsletter, and it's become like a part of my weekly reading routine. So I already like knew that I liked her writing. And because I was getting back into lifting and this book was just coming out, I was like, great, I'm going to listen to this on audiobook while I do my lifts, which is a great idea. I'm a genius. Like, that was such a good idea. Good job, me. And so I really, really loved reading this book, which is why I cannot stop telling people about it, especially like if anyone is even remotely interested in lifting. I am like, you should read this book because it's so great for parsing through a lot of these things around lifting that for me, like, were ideas that I, you know, kind of worked through on my own or like in the past through different lifting communities. But I just really liked seeing like Casey Johnston in this book, like really work through them in a really detailed, long way, like connecting all of these disparate elements of her personal life with these like bigger, broader questions around like, you know, how do we talk about women's bodies? How do we talk about strength? Why are women discouraged from weightlifting when it's actually like really good for you? Like building muscle is something that is actively really, really, really good for you, but it's like so loaded. Like lifting in particular is so often kind of broadly discouraged in the culture because of this idea of like bulk and, you know, just like really outdated and gross ideas about what women's bodies should be like and what they should be, like how we should be like maintaining our bodies, right? They're not scientific. They're like really driven by like cultural norms that are not really designed in our best interest. And so those are questions that like I'm super familiar with. Like I've dealt with, I've been a woman on the internet for like all of these years now. I've read these topics, iterated on so many times. And so there can be ways in which it's very boring, like to be frank, like for me as someone who like has really reached a place of like knowing kind of where I stand on these issues, it kind of can feel like, do I need another version of this? This is the version that I need, which is like a person who's grappling with it in a lot of the same ways that I feel like I've been experiencing it with my own relationship with exercise, but, you know, through her own lens of like also factoring in like how she understands lifting scientifically, putting it into cultural context and cultural history that I knew nothing about, like kind of examining the history of lifting in ways that I there's like so much stuff there that I had no concept of. And it was just really, really cool to see her work through that, because I think it gets into so many of the questions today too around how, like, I don't know, like we talk about like protein culture and like lifting and wellness culture get like overlapped, and like how that plays into like weird conservative messaging as well. Like there are so many complex things at play here, and I just really liked seeing the way that she dissected all of that. And at the same time made me really excited about lifting again, because such a core part of this book is like just having fun with lifts. And for someone who's not into lifting, maybe that doesn't make sense. Like you're just picking up a heavy thing and putting it back down on the ground again. I find it very satisfying to see the thing that I'm lifting get heavier and heavier. Like it's just cool. And I think that's that feeling of how cool it is something that she just explains so nicely. And I love that. I love seeing her explain her progression as she went from someone who couldn't bench a barbell to someone who was lifting a pretty heavy one. So I just found it really fun to read her journey, but also like really emotional, because there's all these aspects of her personal life, of her relationships, and also of her work life and how she's treated as a woman writing on the internet that I just really liked seeing it all tied together. I do want to add like the warning, I guess, that a lot of this book is dealing with Casey's own disordered relationship with fitness and eating as it kind of like informed her life as she was getting into lifting, or before she was getting into lifting. So that is an aspect of the story that if you think you're going to be sensitive to, I think you should know that going in. I think she does kind of dissect it in a way though that for me, again, coming like, especially coming at this as someone who's like postpartum and dealing with like the frustration of like refiguring out my body, I really appreciated the way that she talked about it, because I think there's like an element of needing to be able to account for vanity, but still dissect the norms of what informs what we think we want to look like as well, because that is a part of fitness. Like, there is an element of like, I want to look strong that is like a little bit of a vanity thing. It's like a little bit of like a, I want my body to look a certain way thing, but also like it's informed by like social factors. It's complicated. And I just really like the way that she left room for a lot of the reader's own kind of like ways of like understanding how she went through her relationship with that, but also kind of making room for their own, if that makes sense. It's not a book that's going to take on every aspect of like diet culture or body positivity. I don't think of it as like a book that's necessarily exploring all of those aspects. It's very much about her like specific relationship with these things. And so I always like that. I always like when someone like is really specific about their own experience in a way that lets you kind of understand your own better. And I think the core of it, you know, the core of why I keep telling other people about this book is because I like to tell other people about lifting, and you can tell that Casey likes to tell other people about lifting. She narrated her own memoir, and I love it when people narrate their own memoirs, so you can tell there's still that like personal like aspect to it of her getting to tell her own story. And like I said, I listened to it while I was lifting, and it was like a really good accompaniment. It was sort of like a buddy like being like, yeah, go lift, because I like lifting too. So I could keep going on about this. If you want to talk about lifting, feel free. We can do it. I will be here for you to talk about lifting. But for now, let's move on to the next book, which is another nonfiction book, Mood Machine: The Rise of Spotify and the Cost of the Perfect Playlist, which is written by Liz Pelly, who also did the audiobook. I read this because of Nonfiction Book Club, and I feel like every year we have one book that's like the book. This is the book that I think about forever. Like, it is a book that will always be like one of my reference points. The mega version of that, like the ultimate version of that from our Nonfiction Book Club, is from a few years back, which is The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. That is a book that is probably cited by like most of the other books that we read. Like, it is the core book of Nonfiction Book Club at this point. Mood Machine is like the accessible window into a lot of the ideas of Age of Surveillance Capitalism, because Age of Surveillance Capitalism is dense. It's big. It's a lot to take on. Mood Machine, however, is looking specifically at, as you can tell from the title, Spotify. And I went into this book being like, yeah, I know Spotify is super exploitative. It's not great for artists. In fact, it's pretty terrible for artists. So I wasn't expecting to necessarily be surprised. I was expecting to be outraged, mad, and to be like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't use Spotify. But I wasn't necessarily expecting to like completely reevaluate the way that Spotify has changed the way that I listen to music. But this book really, really, really did that for me. And it still comes up with, for me all the time. Because a big like aspect of what this book is discussing is, yes, the exploitation of artists, but it's also looking at how Spotify has destroyed music as like a community experience. But also, like, I think the case it makes like the most strongly is the way that Spotify playlists in particular, and like the way that those playlists are designed to keep you on the app, are like bad. Like, that the way that like Spotify has taken like the concept of background music and turned it into something somehow even more commodified and like in the background, for lack of a better word, like made it something that's like just so meant to engineer you to stay, has made the music industry worse in a number of ways. That part to me has really gotten to me, and like I think I was already in a place of like, I need to reevaluate my relationship with algorithmic media, but this book really got me to think about it more, and like just to be like, yeah, I hate a lot of algorithms. And that's not also that astounding. Like, that's not surprising to say in that way, because like I feel like we all complain about the algorithm all the time. But I think the way that this book laid out its case, specifically for the way that Spotify does its playlists, just like really made me think about it even more, like about in terms of like the way that it's making music itself worse, because it's like so meant to just like placate you almost. And I just found it really gross. And so that's why this book keeps coming up for me, because that conversation about algorithmic media keeps coming up, right? Like I don't think any of us are escaping that conversation. If you are, I'm really happy for you. Maybe it's because you fully embrace the algorithm, in which case I'm very happy for you, even though I don't like it. Or maybe it's because you've managed to completely escape the algorithm, which is probably not true because you're on YouTube, but like maybe you have somehow. And I don't know. Maybe you are not having these conversations, but for the most part, I feel like most of my friends and I are talking about it. We're talking about how annoying it is to like have, whatever social media platform be like, this is what you want to see. Like I'm always waxing nostalgic for 2007 era Facebook, because nowadays when I go on Facebook, I'm like, I hate this. This is the worst experience of my life. And Spotify is specifically doing that in the realm of music, which should be such a fun thing. And I mean, music has also been a really gross industry for a long time too, so I can't be like Spotify is the reason why the music industry sucks, but it sure as fuck hasn't helped. So that's why we're here. And that's why I keep talking about this book, because it's just one of those books that really encapsulates a specific cornerstone of where we are in the culture. And I think it's like a really helpful, and again, accessible insight into a lot of those ideas of like surveillance capitalism and everything else that I think are so important to understand about media today. And the last book is actually 2 books, and these are my fiction books for today. These are The Tainted Cup and A Drop of Corruption. These are the first 2 books in the Shadow of Leviathan series by Robert Jackson Bennett. The audiobook was narrated by Andrew Falaise, and I loved these books. Obviously, these are a fantasy mystery series, so they're very like Sherlock Holmes-esque. So Anna is our Holmes character. She is incredibly eccentric, incredibly brilliant, and one of her many eccentricities is that she does not often actually visit the crime scenes she's investigating. She finds them very, very stimulating. Obviously, though, she's somehow solving crimes. So how does she does it? She's got her own Watson, who in this case is Dinios. Who's actually our main POV character. And Dinios is particularly special because he's been changed magically to have like a photographic memory, but like next level photographic memory, can like recall all conversations, can recall like everything that he's seeing at the site. So very, very handy to have when you're visiting a crime scene. And so Dinios will basically go out to these crime scenes, investigate, like do like an initial kind of assessment, go back to Anna, and then they will like kind of try to figure stuff out. But sometimes these crimes get pretty intense. Like these mysteries are very like weird to begin with. So like the first one, it's like some imperial officer is like has a tree growing out of them. Like that's weird. Even in magic fantasy world, that's weird. And so they have to figure that out. And it becomes like very layered with all of these other like issues within this kingdom. There are a lot of social issues. There's a lot of corruption going on that you're uncovering. And so as things become increasingly layered, Anna also sometimes gets drawn out. It's fascinating. I found these books so good. I picked them up because I was really specifically craving something kind of Sherlock Holmesy. Like I was probably watching a lot of Elementary at the time, and Elementary is like not a show that I was like obsessed with when it was first out, but like every so often I'll go through a period where I'll rewatch the whole series and then I'll reread the Sherlock Holmes books, and it's like a whole thing. Like, there have been times where Sherlock Holmes is just what I need. And so I was looking for a series that would be recommended as something Sherlock Holmesy, and this came up. It's like sort of like kind of baked into the premise of it. It's like inherently like you can't get away from that comparison. And the reason why I keep talking about this book with people is it's basically my response if anyone asks the question of like, have you read anything good lately? Like this is the thing that I've read that's been good lately. One of the things that I love most about this book is the world building and the magic to it. It's got this flavor to it that as a former bioengineer feels very synthetic biology-ish. There's basically magic kind of rooted in these Leviathan creatures where people are creating this magic based in part on their body and they're translating it into these like wild skills, like, this incredible memory, or like other people are like incredibly gifted at math. And so there's all this sense of like wonder at being able to do that, but there's also this sense of exploring the social implications of that, of seeing like what happens when you're able to do that. Like, who is it that's going to actually be conscripted into those services? How is their well-being going to be taken into account? Like, what is going to become of these people? Like, there's a lot there that, again, as like a former bioengineer, it just feels like really pertinent questions in a world that is like increasingly, I don't know, wanting to be in control of biology. Like, there's just a lot of these ideas that are just very, very familiar, but like obviously in a different aspect because they're doing some pretty intense stuff in this book. And so I really like how Bennett uses magic to explore these broader questions of power and corruption, and like how rot can really seep into all corners of a world, and does it in a way where like the magic doesn't cheapen the analogy, because that's something that I've experienced as well with some books where they want to use magic to explore like social issues, but the magic itself becomes like a cheap substitute for some bigger inequity rather than like a tool to explore it. So I think the book does a really good job of balancing that, of making the magic a tool rather than just like a really shallow metaphor. The audiobook was great. I loved it, so I would recommend that as well. It really made me fall even more in love with the characters and really get to kind of experience the twists and turns of the mystery in a fun way. So I think if you're looking for an audiobook, I would recommend that as well. So yeah, those are my three to four books from last year that I really, really loved and that I still keep telling people about. So as I'm getting back into this year, I'd want to know the books that you I'd want to know the books that you can't stop telling people about. So let me know down below, and thanks for watching. Oh, I also keep meaning to do this because I figure if you're making it all the way through this video and you're sticking around for the end, maybe I should take advantage of it. If you're enjoying my channel and you want to see other things that I work on, I am a science writer and I work on podcasts and other stuff. So I have some links to things that I work on down below, including the podcast Tiny Matters by the American Chemical Society, which I co-host with Sam Jones, which is a ton of fun. We've had a lot of really cool episodes out this year. One of my favorites was the history of clinical trials, and we had one recently about expedition doctors that was really great as well. So you can check all that out down below, and thanks you guys for watching, and bye!